The city of Starbase never sleeps. This week, we saw a load of work getting done to Pad 2, including the first tests of parts of its infrastructure. On top of that, SpaceX is clearly ramping up for a massive testing campaign to ensure all Block 3 components are fully prepared ahead of those vehicles being assembled. And we also witnessed some records and even a few explosions at SpaceX's McGregor, Texas engine testing facility. Howdy, I'm Jack Beyer for NSF, and this is your Starbase Update. Before we dive into the big ticket items of the week, let's take a look at some other parts of Starbase infrastructure that saw some action over the past few days. While we'll talk about some of the more modern adapters and simulators later in this video, this week we also got a bit of a throwback. SpaceX was spotted working on one of the original thrust simulator rigs. These days, most of the testing happens with newer rigs over at Massey's outpost, but seeing work continue on this older piece of hardware was definitely interesting. It could mean that they're modifying it for Block 3 vehicles, or it might signal the beginning of the end for this simulator altogether, with SpaceX clearing space by retiring older equipment. Either way, we knew to keep our eyes on it for the rest of the week. Let's also check in on a project we haven't talked about in a while. The new Giga Bay, SpaceX's massive upcoming production and stacking facility right next to Highway 4. The reason it hasn't been in the spotlight as much is pretty simple. It's kind of like watching paint dry, or more accurately, watching foundations grow. In these shots from Gage, you can see that a lot of steel reinforcement is already in place inside the factory footprint, while workers continue preparing the foundation. And that makes total sense. This building will be very heavy, and once it's finished, it will be packed with equipment that's also very heavy. Getting the foundation right at this stage is absolutely critical, especially in the sandy soil around Boca Chica. Once that foundation work wraps up, which is still likely months away, we should finally start to see wall sections going up. A good place to watch for early signs is the Sanchez lot next door to the production site. Why? Well, SpaceX may once again use that area to prefabricate the wall sections before moving them to the Giga Bay location. So the status for now, foundation work is ongoing and no wall sections are rising yet, but progress is steady. Over at the village, more buildings are taking shape, which we assume will be additional apartments, and behind them, a new parking garage is rising day by day. With the Giga Bay expected to come online in less than a year, the demand for both living and working space in Starbase will increase significantly. Getting these facilities ready on time is crucial, not only to support new hires, but also to give current employees the option to shorten their daily commute, or at least move out of tiny mobile homes and Airstream trailers. Checking in at the nosecone hall, the nosecones are still there. It doesn't really look like much progress has been made recently, at least not from the outside. This is likely because all hands are focused on finishing Ship 39, which is currently the critical pacing item for getting the Block 3 ship ready. We'll cover more on that later. Meanwhile, nosecones 40 through 43 seem relatively calm in their hall, waiting for future workstations to open up so they can continue down the production line. Over at Pad 2, the ongoing work to get the second launch mount ready continues. We're starting to see some scaffolding being removed, but at the same time, crews are still welding wall segments and adding protection to the legs. There's clearly still plenty of work to do, but it does look like we're getting to the point where certain sections of the mount might be finished and some of that scaffolding can finally start to come down. On Wednesday, more cladding was installed onto the Pad 2 liquid oxygen quick disconnect, and the shielding around the system started to look pretty complete. One major difference between Pad 1 and Pad 2 is the way the booster quick disconnect is handled. Pad 1 had a single massive quick disconnect that supplied everything. Pad 2, on the other hand, will have two separate units, one dedicated to liquid oxygen and another to liquid methane. It'll be really interesting to see how the final fueling process plays out for Pad 2, but in theory, this setup could allow for even faster fueling, which, if you think about, is just wild, considering that they already are fueling Starship at about the same pace as they do Falcon Heavy, but with way more propellant. Something to think about. Then on Friday, we finally saw scaffolding being removed from Pad 2, specifically from the chopsticks. This indicates that at least some, if not most, of the work on the new generation of chopsticks is complete, and SpaceX is beginning to wrap up parts of Pad 2. It's a very positive sign in terms of progress towards this pad's readiness. You want more milestones on the road to pad readiness? Well, here's another one. Remember our earlier discussion about the work on the liquid oxygen quick disconnect on Pad 2? Well, SpaceX decided it was time to give the hardware a spin, and it finally was moved. It's a little hard to see, but the LOX disconnect moved in and out, showing that it's already operational. Now it's just a matter of hooking up the final plumbing, and this part of the pad will be fully ready. And yes, I know I just committed the unforced error of saying it's just a matter of extremely complicated task, but you get the point. Seeing this piece of the pad move is a good sign. But wait, there's even more Pad 2 testing. On Saturday, first, the deluge tank farm on Pad 2 spooled up, then we saw some pretty aggressive venting, and then it was time. You can see some water coming from below the pad, and this is indeed the first activation of the flame bucket on Pad 2. It's unclear if, or let me rephrase, it's actually rather unlikely that this first test was all of the systems and the full pressure that this system can run at, but it shows that they're starting to run these tests, of which we will probably see many over the next few weeks. This also probably means that all the loose parts at the bottom of the pad are complete or close to it and properly protected, because the flame diverter is pretty powerful even at low pressure, and we don't expect that this test would have happened if it could have damaged unprotected hardware that's just flapping about all nimbly-bimbly like a cat in the forest. Before we wrap up all the Pad 2 coverage, let's quickly shift over to the Space Coast. This past weekend, the first of the orbital launch mount legs was installed at Pad 39A. This shows that the Space Coast pad is just a few months behind Pad 2 in Starbase, and having it operational sometime in 2026 actually seems entirely feasible. Of course, we'll cover this in much more painstaking detail in our next Cape flyover, so keep an eye out for that. We've got quite an explosive Raptor and McGregor minute lined up for you this week, as SpaceX kept things busy over in Texas. Let's kick it off with the numbers. Across the week, SpaceX ran 20 engine tests at the McGregor test site. Out of those, 8 were Raptors, while the rest leaned heavily toward Merlins. It's been a pretty Merlin-focused stretch overall, but that checks out. After all, Falcon 9 is still the company's workhorse rocket. Diving in now to individual tests, let's start with a highlight from Wednesday on the Raptor South stand. To our knowledge, this stand is now fully dedicated to Raptor 3, so every test that's seen here is with this next generation engine. And what a test it was! SpaceX set a new record for that stand for Raptor 3, a full 354-second burn, making it the longest firing of a Raptor 3 ever recorded on that stand, and only 20 seconds short of the record overall. That's nearly 6 minutes of sustained thrust, and it's right in the ballpark of the longest burn a Raptor would ever need to perform in flight. An impressive milestone, and potentially the start of the final qualification campaign for Raptor 3 before production shifts to fully flight-ready engines. But of course, not every test at McGregor is part of some clean qualification run. Some are stress tests, and others simply just don't go as planned. Take this Raptor 3 firing on the vertical stand, for example. After about 40 seconds of running smoothly, the engine quite literally decided to call it a day, ending in an explosive shutdown. As always, it's hard to know from the outside whether or not this was intentional. SpaceX often pushes engines right to their limits just to see where they'll break. But it's worth noting, especially since the vertical stand didn't see any more firings for the rest of the week, which explains the slightly lower Raptor test count overall. And we even had an extra special treat in terms of McGregor coverage this week, because some of our team was on site, including D. Wise, myself, and Das. D captured some absolutely stunning slow motion footage of Merlin engines in action, and on top of that, I had the chance to fly my drone from a non-public area, and outside any no-fly zones of course, and caught a firing as well as 2 Falcon 9 second stages rolling by. And yes, don't worry, I am a fully licensed FAA unmanned aerial system pilot following all rules and regulations. This and so much more you can catch live every day, every hour, every minute over on our McGregor 24/7 live stream. But before we move on, I do want to highlight our amazing print collection in the NSF store. It's one of the best ways to support what we do, and the best part is the photographer that made the image gets a share of every single print that's sold. So if you're a fan of Starship, SLS, Falcon Heavy, or really any rocket we capture, head over to shop.nasaspaceflight.com and click on prints and browse your favorites. Almost all of them are available on both metal and premium quality paper, so you can pick the perfect fit for your home or whatever wall you're looking to cover. Thanks so much for the support. Now, let's get back to Flight 11 of Starship. Let's start by focusing on Booster 15-2. We already talked about its static fire in last week's episode, but since it happened so close to release, we didn't get to cover the aftermath at that time. SpaceX did confirm on X that the test took place, which might seem banal, but it's actually a good sign. It usually means the initial results look positive. The next step now is getting Booster 15-2 fully prepared for flight. The very first step after a static fire is, of course, getting the booster off the orbital launch mount, and that happened just hours after the test. As a quick reminder, Booster 15-2 rolled out in the early hours between Saturday and Sunday. By Monday, SpaceX was already taking it off the mount. That means in less than 48 hours, they managed to roll out the world's largest booster, set it on the pad, run checks, static fire it, secure it, and then remove it again. This pace is nothing short of mind-boggling. And just to complete the picture, yes, the booster was rolled back to the production site and placed inside Giga Bay 1, where boosters are currently being processed. In these really cool shots from D, you can actually see a rainbow effect shimmering across the booster. That's caused by thin film interference forming on the steel. When the metal gets heated, oxygen reacts with the surface and creates a thin, transparent layer of oxides, especially chromium oxide, just a few nanometers thick. Light reflecting through that layer creates the rainbow effect. If SpaceX is still using the 304L alloy of steel, this means chromium makes up around 18% of the alloy, which explains the clear visibility of the rainbow. In this case, the heat is mostly from the Raptor engines interacting with the booster's body during hot staging. Now just imagine how dramatic ships are going to look after a few re-entries. They'll experience a far more heated environment than just a momentary blast from Raptor engines during hot staging. And we already saw on Ship 37 that intense orange discoloration, which, to be fair, was caused by the steel tile experiments not performing as expected. But still, clearly the heating caused by the plasma around the vehicle will lead to this same cool oxidation effect on ships. I simply cannot wait to see and photograph a metallic rainbowy Starship. The next steps for SpaceX will be running final checkouts after the booster's static fire and of course installing its crown, aka the hot staging ring on top. Fun fact, this will actually mark the last time SpaceX installs a modular hot staging ring on a booster. From here on out, the company will transition to the new integrated hot staging design on Booster V3. After successfully completing the static fire of Booster 15-2, SpaceX wasted no time in moving on to the next steps for flight. The big task was now modifying the orbital launch mount on Pad 1 so it can support static fire of Ship 38. And they're already getting started. Here you can see the modified Ship Quick Disconnect adapter, which will be connected to the booster plumbing on the OLM moved to the pad. This clever bit of engineering allows the ship to be fueled directly from booster hardware. Pretty impressive tinkering from SpaceX. At this stage, the adapter wasn't installed yet, but they did a fit check. They lifted it into place briefly to make sure everything's still lined up. From here, the next step will be full installation. Then on Tuesday, SpaceX lifted the heavy ship Cryo QD adapter into place, mounting it on top of the booster QD. Now, QD might not be the best name here. It doesn't really quick disconnect in the traditional sense. It's more like an umbilical or an adapter, but you get the idea. And the important part is that it's now in position. Of course, the devil is in the details. SpaceX will still have to install some smaller cryogen pipes to make the system fully functional. But this was still a major milestone checked off in preparation for Ship 38's pre-launch engine testing. Here, you can see one of those cryopipes we just mentioned being lifted into place. The adapter includes several different pipes, not just the ones that fuel the ship, but also reclaim lines that allow it to detank, along with other secondary lines that support the system. Once all the pipes are in place, one of the final steps will be installing the front plate. This plate will connect directly to the ship and allow it to be fueled from the adapter. One of the next steps in this process is removing the hold-down clamps that are normally used to secure the super heavy booster to the launch pad. When the mount is switched over to the ship configuration, the clamps end up being in the way, which is why SpaceX has to take them off before the adapter can be installed. On Tuesday, they were already hard at work on that. Several clamps had already been removed. Of course, the big question now is, how long will it be until the static fire of Ship 38? One good clue comes from the rapid replenishment campaign at the tank farm that SpaceX has kicked off. Tankers of all kinds have been visiting over the past few days, which suggests we might be talking about days rather than weeks before the next static fire. Maybe we'll even get to see a ship roll in static fire this week. Then came Wednesday, what we might call Adapter Installation Day. The first sign of action was the movement of the chopsticks. They had to be repositioned to make room for the adapter lift, since the chopsticks would otherwise get in the way during that maneuver. Another key piece of hardware is, of course, the adapter itself, SQR3. This structure rolled down the highway on Wednesday in preparation for installation. And now we get to arguably the biggest news of the week, maybe even of the decade. After years and years of speculation and uncertainty and gnashing of teeth and whoa, we finally know what SQR stands for, and I'm not kidding. Adrian, the writer of this video, good job Adrian, decided to give it one more shot and posted on X to Dan Hout, SpaceX communications manager and familiar face from live streams. And this time, Dan actually responded. What a legend! Is it ship qualification ring wall? Ship quick ring wall? Drum roll. SQR means square. Yes, really. SQR stands for square ring wall. That's because the stand is built out of square beams rather than the I-beams used previously. Years of speculation, and the answer was literally just the word square. Props to Dan for finally clearing this up. It's been an ongoing discussion for a while, and it's great to have a definitive answer. And bonus points go for the Stargate reference, as he joked it could stand for Stargate Quantum Ring, arguably a much cooler meaning. So yeah, Square Ring Wall 3 rolled out. Yay! It's heading for installation on Orbital Launch Mount 1 for what could be the last static fires ever on the pad after years of incredible service. After Ship 38 static fires, there's just this last launch to go, and then we'll have to say goodbye to this historic launch pad, at least in its current form. For more on what we expect to happen there, watch our Starbase update from a few weeks ago, where we talked about some planning documents that dropped showing what is in store for this pad in the future. With the LR 11,000 crane moving over to Pad 1 just a few hours after Square Ring Wall 3 was moved, it was pretty clear that SpaceX was trying to move fast on this since, well, this is the crane that will be used to lift the stand into place. And here we go. If SpaceX has experience with one thing, it's lifts. Just a few hours later, we saw SQR3 being lifted and installed on the orbital launch mount. There's still a bit of fine-tuning left, but at this pace, we could realistically see Ship 38 on the pad by late this week or early next week. Things are moving incredibly fast. For those who might have missed it, this former ship transport stand, Square Ring Wall 3, was modified after the Ship 36 explosion at Massey Outpost. The changes allow it to support static fires on the orbital launch mount, minimizing testing downtime during the rebuild of Massey's. And once the LR 11,000 crane did its job, which is lifting the SQR adapter into place, it was of course far more useful over at Pad 2, where there's still a whole bunch of construction happening right now. So it's time for it to move back, and move back is exactly what it did. Another piece of infrastructure showing activity was the chopsticks on Pad 1, which were opened on Friday along with movement of the ship quick disconnect arm. This could be warm-up and movement checks ahead of transport and lift of Ship 38, and we take it as a positive sign. But that said, similar movements have sometimes happened spontaneously, simply when SpaceX decided it was time to check out the hardware. If you want to keep track of when Starship is ready for its 11th flight, I always recommend checking the Next Spaceflight Starship page. There, you can easily see the check marks and how much of the Booster 15 work is already complete. The next steps, of course, are testing Ship 38, removing the OLM Starship Static Fire Adapter, aka SQR3 or Square Ring Wall 3, and then we're already entering the stage where flight warnings, NOTAMs, and other regulatory notifications will start to pour in. So it might not be long before we see a lot more check marks on this list, pending, of course, that Ship 38 rolls out, static fires successfully, and rolls back. Now let's check in with Ship 39. This is the upper stage that is currently expected to fly on Starship Flight 12, and it's also the first upper stage of the Block 3 production line. Right now, it's still sitting inside its scaffolding cage in the Star Factory as SpaceX finishes applying the thermal protection system tiles. You can see the gaps in between them shrinking, and if you look at the flaps, most of the body is now covered. It seems they are approaching the level of tiling we would expect on a ship just before stacking. The big question is, when they start stacking the main tank, whether they'll begin with the nose first, and more broadly, how the production line for Block 3 ship is being organized. If they want to fly it this year, they'll need to move quickly. On the booster side, we have a particularly interesting piece of hardware that Caesar spotted this week. What you're looking at appears to be the landing tank for a Block 3 booster. This tank sits inside the LOX tank and is designed to counteract sloshing and rapid movement of propellant during landing maneuvers. In the nearly empty main tanks, the propellants can slosh around significantly, making it difficult to consistently feed the Raptor engines when needed. The outer shell of this piece is the main body of the landing tank, which stores liquid oxygen. Inside of it, near the top, there's a smaller capped pipe. This is the main methane transfer tube that runs through the landing tank. By the way, it may look small, but it's pretty sizable compared to typical transfer lines. It just looks small relative to the massive landing tank. So what is this exactly? Is it the aft section for Booster 18 just flopping around the Star Factory? Maybe. But SpaceX has tested nearly every major Block 3 component with a dedicated test article, so this could just as easily be another booster test tank used before installing a similar part in Booster 18. In fact, we know about the Booster 18.1 and 18.3 test articles. This is like the old prank where you release 2 pigs in a school and paint the numbers 1 and 3 on them, and we are sort of expecting Booster 18.2 test tank at some point, but who knows if one will ever actually exist or if we'll even get to see it. For now, it's too early to celebrate seeing an actual Block 3 booster aft section until we know where this piece heads. Remember at the start of the episode when we talked about the old can crusher seeing some unusual movement and activity and that we said we'd keep our eyes on it? Well, we did, and we're getting a more and more clear picture of what might be happening. It was moved inside of Giga Bay 1, and with the test article for the booster hot staging ring also in play, it seems SpaceX modified the old can crusher to get it ready to test the new integrated hot staging design. This theory was then confirmed on Friday, as you can barely see here. This is the integrated hot staging ring test article, now on top of the can crusher. This can crusher will be able to apply vertical forces to the ring, testing the structural integrity of the article before a similar setup is installed on Booster 18. Another interesting aspect of this is the fact that the new load spreader design that was spotted in the last few days has been used for this exact task. This new Booster Block 3 load spreader seemingly integrates with the hot staging ring and is able to lift the booster. Pretty cool. So, do you think SpaceX is taking the right approach with all these test tanks? It definitely seems like we're seeing a lot of them before they move on to actual Block 3 hardware. Maybe there are some lessons learned from Block 2 in play here. Let us know what you think in the comments. At this point, when we begin writing for the next Starbase update, I wouldn't be surprised to see a ship on the OLM, but we'll just have to wait and see. As always, thanks for watching, and don't forget, be excellent to each other.